This case took place in Chile in 1987 during the dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet. More than 180 poor families were violently displaced by the authorities from their community in the Iquique province and relocated to the Alto Hospicio sector in Chile. Alto Hospicio was a dusty, desolate piece of land in the middle of the desert, also in the Iquique province. In this settlement, there was no electricity, drinking water, or even a sewage system. There were no offices, schools, or hospitals, and the area lacked all urban infrastructure. Because there were no roads, garbage trucks couldn't reach the settlement either, resulting in massive piles of waste that were nearly impossible to clear. This worsened the already harsh living conditions of the people. Over 30 years later, the city still stands in the desert, with over 120,000 people now living there. The area is still developing, with small businesses, several schools, a hospital, and a police station now in place, but the standard of living remains very low. A study on urban conditions and infrastructure conducted in 2014 ranked the city last in the nation for quality of life. Unbearable heat during the day, equally unbearable cold at night, poverty, rising unemployment, and homes made of low-quality, flimsy materials create extremely harsh conditions for normal life. As a result, many residents dream of leaving Alta, but without enough savings, it's difficult to move away. Most people struggle daily for survival in extreme poverty. Several times a week, utility companies deliver clean drinking water, which is urgently needed in the poorest parts of the city. Women from these neighborhoods leave their homes early in the morning with containers to stand in long lines to collect water, while the men spend their days working in the mines or collecting garbage for a pittance. In other words, life in Alta is very difficult. At the beginning of 2001, a series of mysterious disappearances in the city attracted national media attention. Some government officials faced public outrage and concern. The tragic events surrounding the disappearance of the victims left a devastating and shameful mark on the history of the Chilean police. The indifference and disdain with which the authorities and law enforcement treated the victims' families reflected the class consciousness characteristic of certain parts of society at the time. It all began in mid-September 1998, when some regional newspapers reported that police had found the body of a girl on a beach in the Alta area. The victim was 17-year-old Graciela Saravia. The police had been alerted by fishermen who were out with their boats a few dozen meters from the shore. The men claimed to have seen a parked white car and a couple arguing, but they were too far away to see the faces of those involved and decided not to intervene, thinking the situation wouldn't escalate into murder. In fact, the young girl had been struck multiple times in the face with a rock, killing her instantly. Her body and legs bore multiple bruises, indicating that the attacker had dragged her along the ground before and after the murder. While the country was preparing for national holidays, this mysterious crime was quickly overshadowed and covered up, with no suspects found. On November 24, 1999, a year after Graciela's murder, a 14-year-old girl named Macarena Sanchez mysteriously disappeared. She left home early in the morning to go to school, but never arrived. The police's reaction to her parents' appeal was highly unusual. They suggested that many young girls in Iquique offer intimate services for money, and that Macarena might have run away from home to support herself in this way. Authorities advised the parents to wait a few days, assuming their daughter would eventually return home. However, as the days, weeks, and months passed, hope of finding the girl alive faded. The authorities didn't bother to conduct a serious investigation, wrongfully assuming that she had voluntarily left home. On February 21, 2000, another girl named Sarah Gomez was reported missing. A month later, on March 23rd, 14-year-old Laura Sola disappeared on her way to school and never returned home. On April 5th of the same year, Catherine Arsa was reported missing after she failed to return home. Gradually, teenage girls began to vanish without a trace. There were no witnesses, no suspects, and the police's only response was that they had all left home in search of a better life. The authorities' tactlessness and inaction were staggering, forcing the parents of the missing girls to take to the streets in search of answers. Due to a lack of well-paying jobs or simply because of family issues, many young people left home in search of financial opportunities, and some found illegal means as the quickest way out of poverty. This was, at least, the reasoning of local authorities. Rumors circulated that some of the girls who had left home had been transported to Bolivia and enslaved, but this remained speculation. On May 22nd, another girl, 17-year-old Patricia Palmer, disappeared on her way home from school. She became the sixth victim in a series of recent disappearances. 11 days later, Macarena Montesinos Viviana Guerre, the eighth victim, disappeared. However, her father was not left in the dark. Some months earlier, Orlando Guerre, Viviana's father, had read a flyer seeking information about another missing child, Catherine Arsa. A few days before Viviana's disappearance, she had shown him the same flyer and posted it on a lamppost near their home. Guerre found out that Viviana and Catherine had attended the same school and that 6 other girls had disappeared under similar circumstances. He then decided to organize the relatives of the missing girls to pressure the authorities for a proper investigation. Orlando's rebellious spirit helped him and the other parents overcome their despair. The possibility that a whole network of kidnappers and traffickers was at work in the city deeply worried the locals. The authorities did their best to calm the public. Under Orlando's leadership, volunteers formed small search teams and began combing the area for clues. They visited nearby villages, distributed flyers with photos of the missing, and expanded their search after using up their last savings. Unfortunately, all their efforts were in vain. Weeks later, during another search in remote areas, the first clues were found. On June 18, 2000, a school uniform and a backpack were discovered at a garbage dump relatively close to the city. These items belonged to Viviana Guerre. A few hours later, personal belongings of Catherine Arsa were found at another dump. Some of the recovered clothes were stained with blood. In the following months, the actions of the missing girls' parents garnered widespread media attention. One of the most chilling and heartbreaking images was when the grandmother of one of the missing girls found her granddaughter's underwear at a garbage dump. Her cries of disbelief reflected the pain of all the parents who had yet to find their daughters. With the belongings of the girls in hand, the relatives organized small marches, which gradually drew media attention to their plight. For the first time, the case and its strange circumstances became public. All the girls had disappeared either on their way to or from school. The parents were unanimous in their belief that their daughters had not run away from home and that something terrible had happened to them. They were all conscientious students from modest but respectable families with strong values. In other words, these disappearances deserved serious attention and a proper investigation by the authorities. Over time, public pressure grew, and the demonstrations organized by the relatives of the missing girls attracted more supporters and concerned citizens. Orlando Guerre continued to pressure the authorities and even secured an audience with then Chilean President Ricardo Lagos, who was on a business trip to Iquique. The president agreed to give the desperate parents some of his time, but remained cold and unsympathetic. He assured them that the police were doing their best to find the girls, but for now, they needed to be patient. With that, the president ended the meeting and left, unwilling to listen to the parents' accusations against the police. Later, Lagos told reporters that he believed the investigation was the most thorough the country had ever seen. He also assured them that he was willing to meet with the parents of the missing girls again if they had any new facts that could influence the investigation. In other words, he shifted the responsibility for gathering evidence onto the parents. Many public figures, whether politicians or simply celebrities, commented on the case. The well-known psychiatrist Maria Cordero visited the city in September 2001 in connection with her participation in a psychiatric congress. When asked about the case, she said, "May the families of the missing girls forgive me, but I'm sure they left home in search of a better economic future." She believed the poor living conditions had driven them to leave. Cordero made this statement before the girls' bodies were recovered from abandoned mines and garbage dumps. On October 3, 2001, events occurred that changed the course of the investigation. A local egg supplier was driving his truck along the road, connecting Iquique to Route 5, when, around noon, he saw a girl walking alone by the roadside. She appeared thin, dirty, and confused. The man didn't hesitate to stop and ask if she was okay. The 13-year-old girl explained that a man had abused her, thrown her into a deep shaft, and tied her hands. She said she had lost consciousness during the fall, but managed to free her hands when she woke up and made her way to the surface. She then walked to the road to seek help. The girl was brought to the police station and then taken to the regional hospital. An initial medical examination revealed that she had suffered a skull fracture, a broken collarbone, chest bruises, a cut on the front of her head, and a concussion. It was confirmed that she had been a victim of violence. The attending physician was deeply concerned for the girl and urged her to share everything that had happened to her. The girl's name was Barbara, and during police questioning, she recounted how a man, posing as a taxi driver, had offered to drive her to school early in the morning. Barbara agreed, but once in the car, she realized she had made a mistake. At some point, the attacker pulled out a knife and ordered her to sit still, or he would kill her. He then drove her to an abandoned mine in the middle of the desert, where he committed the heinous act. They both got out of the car, and the man forced Barbara to kneel in front of the mine. He told her he had killed people like her before. Barbara was terrified, begging him to let her go, trying to calm him down, but the man ignored her pleas. After a while, he pushed her into the mine shaft and started throwing heavy rocks at her. Several hit her head, and she lost consciousness. It could be said that Barbara was lucky, as she landed on the ledge of a cliff about 10 meters down. Otherwise, she would have fallen to the bottom of the 200-meter deep mine and died instantly. When she woke up, she found herself unable to move because of the rocks the murderer had thrown on her. Barbara waited a few minutes before standing up and trying to free herself. She had lost a lot of blood, her head was shattered, and she fainted several times on the way, but she survived and walked 4 kilometers to seek help. The next day, Barbara's mother filed a complaint for kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder. As a result, the police launched an operation to arrest the suspect. There were suspicions that the attacker was not only a rapist, but also a serial killer. None of the police officers involved in the operation had experience with such cases, as serial killers were extremely rare in Chile. They had to rely on the word of the girl who had miraculously survived. Barbara provided details that could be crucial in catching the perpetrator. She described the man as middle-aged, with black-dyed hair, driving a white car, and wearing a shirt with the municipality's logo. She also remembered that 2 small stuffed animals from the children's TV show Bananas in Pajamas were hanging from the rearview mirror. The following morning, police officers at a checkpoint stopped a white vehicle. The description of the suspected rapist and murderer had already been distributed to all officers in the area. The patrol officers asked the driver to get out of the car and noticed the same banana figures hanging from the mirror. The driver, 37-year-old Julio Perez Silva, didn't appear nervous. The officers informed him that he needed to come to the police station because of an issue with his license plate. Silva willingly agreed, making no attempt to flee or explain himself. However, once at the station, his confidence vanished when he learned that he had been arrested for an alleged rape the previous day. Barbara recognized the suspect in a video provided by the police, filmed while he was in his cell. She also identified his white Mazda Capella, the Bananas in Pajamas figures, and the homemade knife he had used to threaten her. Within hours, Silva underwent hair, semen, and blood tests, as well as psychological evaluations, and his fingerprints were taken. Under pressure from the authorities, the accused admitted to having had consensual relations with Barbara, which was itself a serious crime, given that she was a minor. However, he denied attempting to kill her or being involved in the disappearances and murders of the other girls. Meanwhile, police searched Silva's house, where he lived with his partner Nancy Buero and her daughters. They were shocked when the police arrived. During the search, a shirt with the municipality's logo, previously described by Barbara in her statement, was found. Julio had been in custody for just 24 hours when the news of his arrest hit the front pages of all the local newspapers. The police hurried to inform President Ricardo Lagos that a suspect had been arrested in connection with the missing girls and that he might be a serial killer. This could have meant that all the public claims by the authorities suggesting that the missing girls had run away to engage in illegal activities were false and exposed the incompetence of those handling the case. The police continued to pressure Silva, hoping for a confession as soon as possible. However, Silva refused to take the blame. The extreme measures taken by the officers to obtain a confession were, to say the least, controversial. The prisoner was denied food, water, and sleep for 3 days. After a tough interrogation on Sunday, October 7th, Silva finally confessed to killing 3 underage girls and dumping their bodies at the bottom of an abandoned mine. Shortly after, he admitted to more victims, stating that some of the bodies were buried in various garbage dumps. The police tried to conduct their investigation in secret, but information quickly leaked to several national newspapers. The first bodies were found on Tuesday, October 9th, at small garbage dumps around Iquique. Later, Silva himself pointed out where he had hidden some of the children's remains. After the discovery of the first 4 victims, it was decided that their bodies would be sent immediately to the forensic service, as the remains were already in an advanced state of decomposition, making identification difficult. On October 11th, the parents of the missing girls were summoned to the forensic service to identify the remains. Most of the bodies were identified shortly thereafter. The public reaction was swift, and the case shocked the entire nation. Social pressure on law enforcement grew, and it became clear that many of these cases hadn't even been registered in the system. Meanwhile, officers began blaming each other, trying to evade responsibility, which led to the resignation of several high-ranking officials. The case revealed the shortcomings of various government agencies and triggered a political earthquake. For weeks, the news of the serial killer's arrest dominated the front pages of the media. Chile hadn't seen a serial murder case since 1982, when 2 police officers, known as the psychopaths of Villa del Mar, killed 10 people. The funeral of the victims of the so-called psychopath of Alta Hospicio took place on October 15th at the cathedral in Iquique. When the victims' parents returned home, they wondered if they could have done more. Amidst pain and poverty, they had made enormous efforts to find their children alive. They had shown the country what it means to fight for those you love, and had taught the nation to listen to the cries of the suffering with more sensitivity and understanding. Psychiatrists, psychologists, and forensic experts questioned why Silva had committed such brutal crimes. Silva himself couldn't explain it. Julio was a serious man, quiet and even withdrawn, obsessed with cleanliness. At first glance, he seemed friendly, but he never had any friends. Julio Perez Silva was born on July 15, 1963, in the port city of Valparaiso. His former classmates and teachers remembered him as a quiet and calm child. Due to his family's modest financial situation, he was forced to attend school in rubber sandals and without a uniform, which made him the target of constant teasing. Silva's father was an extremely violent man who regularly beat his son and wife. From an early age, Silva was used to being afraid of his father. At the age of 7, Julio fainted for the first time when his father slammed his head against a wall after Julio had entered the room without asking for permission. After that, he tried to avoid his father whenever possible. According to Silva, he was molested by an older boy at the age of 11, but he kept it a secret because he was extremely embarrassed. As a teenager, the future criminal dropped out of school due to poor academic performance and lost interest in studying. From the few memories of those who knew him, Silva's favorite childhood hobby was playing soccer. He regularly participated in neighborhood tournaments and was quite talented with the ball, but as soon as the games ended, he would shower, get dressed, and leave without speaking to anyone. At the age of 22, Julio married, and soon the newlyweds had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, the marriage didn't last long. Silva then met another woman who also had 2 young daughters. Those around him said he was an excellent husband and treated the children as if they were his own. He worked regularly and was a friendly neighbor. However, rumors of an alleged attempted rape of one of the girls also ended this relationship. Julio then moved to the northern city of Iquique to start a new life. A few weeks after his move, he met Nancy Boiro, an older woman with 6 daughters. Together they moved to Alto Hospicio, where they later settled in a small, modest house. In mid-1998, Nancy managed to sell a small piece of land in Iquique, and with the proceeds, she decided to buy Julio a used car and pay for driving lessons. At that time, Silva worked as a laborer loading salt bags and earned very little. The financial situation became increasingly difficult, so Julio decided to earn extra money as an unlicensed taxi driver. Around the same time, a series of disappearances began in the region. Some of Silva's neighbors recalled that he was always vacuuming and cleaning the inside of his car, but they didn't think much of it. According to Julio, his first crime was committed without any plan. He claimed he had met an underage girl who agreed to engage in intimate relations with him for money. When they reached a secluded beach, Silva allegedly realized that his companion had no intention of doing anything and only wanted to steal the money from his glove compartment. In a fit of rage, Silva attacked the girl, hitting her in the face with a rock until she died. A gold medal with the emblem of a soccer team, which Silva's partner had given him, was found at the crime scene. Unfortunately, this information only came to light after the case became widely known. The police officer working at the scene simply took the medal, assuming it had no connection to the crime. This action further highlighted the low qualifications of some police officers. Thanks to his car, Silva could move freely around different parts of the city, offering rides to teenage girls. He targeted young girls who agreed to get into his car under the pretext of giving them a ride along the desolate streets of Alto Hospicio. After several psychiatric and psychological evaluations, it was determined that Julio Silva suffered from antisocial personality disorder and displayed severe antisocial behavior that prevented him from forming emotional connections with others. Despite this diagnosis, Silva seemed outwardly friendly. He was sometimes able to hold conversations with those he met. His partner Nancy, for example, claimed that he was loving, open, and attentive in their relationship, giving her massages and even bringing her breakfast in bed. She also said he had never been aggressive. The only strange behavior Nancy noticed was catching Julio several times, staring nervously and excitedly at other women. As the investigation continued, more bodies of missing girls who had disappeared between April 1999 and August 2001 in the Alto Hospicio area were found. However, Silva denied knowing anything about them. On February 26, 2002, Julio Perez Silva was found guilty of 14 murders and 1 attempted murder. Throughout the entire trial, the defendant showed no emotion, expressed no remorse, and never apologized to the families of his victims. He maintained his innocence, claiming that the police officers had framed him and coerced him into confessing. Silva stated that on the day of his arrest, he had been beaten and tortured by the police until he couldn't bear the pain anymore and decided to accept the accusations against him. Given such serious claims, the authorities assumed Silva had lost his mind and was simply lying. However, it was clear that some people remained unconvinced. Soon, various rumors began circulating in the country's information channels. One of the darkest rumors surrounding the case was that Barbara, the only surviving victim, had been involved in a romantic relationship with Julio and had helped him lure other girls into his car for abduction. The families of the victims refused to believe this and publicly expressed their trust and support for Barbara. Reports suggest that Barbara was never able to finish high school. As a result, she eventually left the city and was said to have lived in poverty on the streets. Julio Perez Silva was initially incarcerated at the Tapar prison, but was later moved to solitary confinement in another prison in the capital region. 4 guards monitor his every move around the clock to prevent him from committing suicide, which he had attempted several times. Despite his unpredictable behavior, Silva occasionally behaves well, listening to music, watching movies, and making crafts. He is also allowed to play soccer with the prison staff a few times a month. He has never been placed in the general population of the prison, as it would be impossible for him to survive there. Other inmates had already sworn to kill him at the first opportunity. The families of the victims have yet to receive a proper apology from the authorities. President Ricardo Lagos granted them modest houses of barely more than 50 square meters and laughable lifetime payments of $200 as compensation. Thank you for watching and take care.
On November 13, 2024, security cameras at the Las Praderas residential complex in the district of Comas, Lima, recorded footage that would soon appear across local media. In the video, a 26-year-old woman could be seen holding a small white dog in her arms. Beside her walked a slim young man with a serious expression. Moments later, they entered apartment number 307. Later, the woman was found dead. Her body was discovered in a suitcase that belonged to the owner of the apartment. There were no signs of a struggle. At that point, investigators were able to identify the main suspect as a member of the Peruvian National Police. On November 19th of the same year, he was found dead at the Las Perlas Hotel in San Juan de Lurigancho, one of Lima's largest districts. Public attention, however, was drawn less by the death itself than by the circumstances surrounding it. This was the beginning of the exposure of a larger, darker story that shook the entire country and deepened the crisis of trust in the police. Sheila Mayumi Condor Torres was born on April 7, 1998, in Tarma, a city in central Peru in the Junín region. She was the eldest daughter of her parents, Maximo and Elsa, who later had another daughter. Details about Sheila's childhood and private life are only partly known because the family tried to keep them out of the public eye. She was very close to her relatives and had loved nature and animals since childhood. When Sheila was still a teenager, her family moved to the district of Santa Anita in Lima in search of better living conditions. There, she finished school and began training as a secretary. Shortly before her disappearance, she worked as a cashier in a restaurant that belonged to her relatives. In her free time, Sheila helped around the house, especially when it came to caring for animals. On the morning of November 13, 2024, Sheila left home as usual. She took some personal belongings with her and said goodbye to her aunt, promising that she would return soon. She was wearing a blue blouse, blue jeans, sneakers, and a pink shoulder bag. That evening, Sheila was supposed to begin her shift at the family restaurant, but she never appeared. Her parents began to worry and tried to call her, but Sheila did not answer the phone. That was completely unlike her, so her mother went to the police to report her daughter missing. However, the police refused to accept the report, even though Peru had a protocol for cases involving missing persons. The officers did not even take Elsa's words seriously. They merely said that Sheila was an adult and had probably just gone to meet a young man. But Elsa felt that something was wrong. She returned home and decided to search for her daughter herself. Later, a friend of Sheila's managed to access her computer. He discovered that a messaging program was still open. The young woman's last messages were addressed to a young man named Darwin. The messages showed that Sheila had agreed to look after his dog. Their correspondence did not appear to suggest that a romantic relationship was developing between them. On the contrary, Darwin had offered to pay her for the service. They agreed to meet on Wednesday, November 13th. Darwin's apartment was located in the Las Praderas residential complex in the district of Comas. Although the correspondence seemed normal, some details were still alarming. For example, when Sheila asked him to transfer the money to her bank card, Darwin insisted on paying in cash. She also said that she could only stay until 4 p.m. Even so, he suggested that she stay longer and have a drink with him. Considering all these circumstances, Sheila's family gathered as much information as possible about Darwin. They learned that he was 25 years old. He served as a non-commissioned officer in a special police unit called Grupo Terrana, an operational group specialized in intelligence work and disguise. At that time, however, Darwin belonged to the so-called Escuadrón Verde, a unit focused on fighting street crime and the trade in illegal substances. The next day, Sheila's relatives went to the police again and told them about Darwin. But even then, the officers refused to open an investigation. They explained that the area where the young man lived was outside their jurisdiction. The young woman's relatives then went to the police station in the district of Comas, but their report was not accepted there either. They were told that they could be charged with defamation if Sheila reappeared. The officers also claimed that they did not know the suspect personally. Still, her family remained persistent. They asked the police to review the camera footage from the building where Darwin lived, but they were refused again. Only on Friday, November 15th, did Elsa manage to persuade the officers to file an official missing person report for Sheila. After that, one of the police officers called Darwin and asked him directly about her whereabouts. The young man replied that they had indeed met, but claimed that she had left his apartment the same day. During the night leading into Sunday, November 17th, residents of the same residential complex complained about a foul smell coming from Darwin's apartment. Soon afterward, police officers arrived, and Elsa joined them. When they entered the apartment, a horrifying scene appeared before them. Sheila's dismembered remains were hidden in a suitcase under the bed and in a plastic bag in the bathroom. Everything suggested that the crime had been carefully planned, which immediately made Darwin the main suspect. Inside the apartment itself, however, there was not a single clue confirming his presence. In her first public statement, Elsa emphasized that the police had ignored her pleas. According to her, Sheila might still have been alive if the officers had acted in time and checked Darwin's apartment on the same day the family discovered her daughter's correspondence. Later, it became known that other people had been inside Darwin's apartment after Sheila's visit. They had rented the apartment for a party that took place from Friday to Saturday, November 16th. The police managed to identify those people. They were students from the Public Naval Technological Institute. During questioning, the young people said that they had indeed been inside the apartment, but had noticed nothing suspicious. Since there was no direct evidence against them, they had to be released. Police Commander Ronald Nunez, who headed the police station in Santa Luz Mila, Comas and was connected to Shayla's case, gave a statement. He said that he had never met Darwin. Later, his statement was supported by other employees of the police station, the same officers who had refused to accept Elsa's report, on the grounds that there was no reason to believe Shayla had been kidnapped or was in danger. Over time, the case became increasingly tangled, and Shayla's family desperately tried to get answers. At one point, residents of the Las Praderas complex told the police that strange incidents had already occurred in Darwin's apartment. It turned out that 3 young women had accused Darwin and 2 other police officers of drugging them with unknown drinks and illegal substances, then taking advantage of their helpless condition and forcing them into sexual acts. According to the women's own statements, everything happened on the evening of January 28, 2023. That day, a group of 3 friends came to Darwin's apartment, although only one of them knew him personally. Besides the young man, 2 other members of the Peruvian National Police were present. According to the victims, they had been drinking alcohol, but not in large amounts. Around midnight, one of the women felt unwell, and Darwin suggested that she rest in a separate room. A few hours later, another woman noticed that it was already late and said they had to leave. At that moment, one of the police officers said she was boring and suggested that she have one more drink before leaving. Darwin prepared that drink. She agreed, drank it quickly, and lost consciousness. When the first and second victims regained consciousness, they realized that something serious had happened and immediately left the apartment. Once outside, they called the police. Around 6 o'clock in the morning, officers from the nearest police station arrived. The victims said that their friend was still inside the apartment. The police then entered the apartment and found the 3rd young woman. She was unconscious and lying on Darwin's bed. He only said that she was his girlfriend. Later, during the investigation, the first victim identified one of Darwin's colleagues as the man who had forced her into sexual acts. The second woman said that she, too, had been sexually harassed. The third victim admitted that she could not say exactly who had touched her because she did not remember anything. Based on these statements, a criminal case was opened. However, the forensic medical examination found no evidence of a violation of the young women's sexual integrity. After that, the investigative authority requested that the case be dismissed. Even so, Darwin was arrested and spent a little more than 2 weeks in custody. It is important to mention that it was the prosecutor's office that insisted on his detention, but the court rejected the request. In the end, police leadership merely suspended him from duty for 6 months. The case files showed that the investigation and the decision-making process were repeatedly delayed, allowing Darwin to continue serving in the police. As for the 2 other officers who were in the apartment with him that evening, they were also involved in the case, but remained in their positions. One of them later even received an award, despite his involvement in the incident. When Darwin's name appeared in the news again, the 3 women who had suffered because of his actions, together with his colleagues from January 2023, issued a public statement. They reminded the public that the investigation in their case was still unfinished and that they still had not obtained justice. One of the women also said that they could have been in Shayla's place if things had gone differently. But that was far from the only incident involving Darwin. After the investigation into Shayla's case began, a other similar cases came to light. One of them happened in March 2024. At that time, another woman agreed to meet Darwin. Originally, they were supposed to walk on the beach, but then he persuaded her to come to his home. As in the earlier case, the victim lost consciousness after drinking the beverage he offered her. When she came to, she found herself naked in his bed. Her clothes were on the floor. Fortunately, she managed to leave the apartment. With the last of her strength, she made it home. For almost the entire day, the woman suffered from dizziness and severe headaches. Nevertheless, she decided not to go to the police. Most likely, a feeling of shame stopped her. Only later, when Darwin's name appeared in the news again, did she, like the other victims, say that this man belonged behind bars. And although it was still unclear whether these women were the only victims, Darwin's pattern had become clear. Everyone who knew him agreed that he was not an impulsive person and that he acted deliberately. More and more signs suggested that Shyla's death was no accident. Eventually, Shyla's family managed to obtain the security camera recordings from the Las Praderas residential complex. The first images showed Shyla entering the building as Darwin opened the door for her. He was holding his white dog in his arms. After some time, the cameras filmed the young woman again. This time, she herself was carrying the same dog through the hallway. Those were the last recordings in which Shyla was still alive. Later, the lawyer for the Condor family, Aaron Alaman, filed an official complaint with the Peruvian National Police. It stated that police officers had ignored the plea of Shyla's mother and failed to take action in a case that, from the beginning, showed all the signs of femicide. It also emerged that Darwin continued working for the police and even performed security duties during an economic forum. This made tracking his movements even more difficult. Finally, it became clear that Darwin had gone into hiding. When the lawyer for the Condor family learned of this, he contacted the Ministry of the Interior and Interpol, asking that the young man be placed on an international wanted list. The news received widespread attention, and Darwin's photo was circulated across the country, but it was already too late. The location of his mobile phone indicated that he was in the area of San Juan de Lurigancho. The police launched a large-scale search operation and checked more than 20 hotels in that area, but the suspect was not found in any of them. On November 19, 2024, police received an anonymous call. The caller said he had seen a man who looked like Darwin. He was in the Las Perlas Hotel, in room 30. The police immediately rushed to the scene. Inside the room, they found the body of a young man. His neck was attached to a stand that held a television, and there were deep wounds on his wrists. Darwin's identity card and police badge were lying nearby. There was no weapon in the room. Everything looked strange, to say the least. A few hours later, a video appeared on social media. It had been recorded by the police officers who discovered the body and took it to a clinic. Around the same time, former Prime Minister Ana Jara expressed doubts about the circumstances of the young man's death. According to her, the body was already in a state of rigor mortis when it was found, meaning it had fully stiffened. That meant there had been no need to take it to the clinic. As was later determined, Darwin had already been dead for at least several hours when the police arrived. Even so, the officers said that they believed he was still alive and had decided to avoid possible responsibility for his death. However, few people believed that version. The behavior of the police officers was considered a serious violation. According to protocol, they were required to wait for the arrival of crime scene investigators. The head of the Criminal Investigation Division, Colonel Riscardo Espinosa, confirmed that the officers had violated protocol. Under all these circumstances, speculation appeared in the media about the possible murder of Darwin. In fact, the distance between his neck and the floor was too small for it to be a convincing case of hanging. In addition, the stand to which he was tied could hardly have supported his weight, since the structure appeared unstable. Furthermore, there was almost no blood visible on the floor, which seemed strange for the version that he had killed himself, at least considering the type and depth of the wound on his wrist. Later, a forensic examination confirmed that Darwin had died 8 to 10 hours before his body was taken to the clinic. This deepened suspicions even further, prompting the Congress of the Republic of Peru to summon Interior Minister Juan José Santibáñez to give a statement. According to the minister, the actions of the police officers involved in the handling of Darwin's death could be considered a breach of duty. He also promised to conduct an internal investigation to determine why the suspect had remained in service despite numerous complaints against him. Former Minister for Women and Vulnerable Populations, Gloria Montenegro, also commented on the situation, saying that Peru had become a state that enabled violence against women. Soon afterward, new inconsistencies emerged in the case. No one understood how Darwin had been able to check into the hotel. If he had used his identity card, why had the hotel staff not called the police immediately? After all, his face was already visible everywhere. Later, Sheila's family demanded official confirmation of the identity of the young man who had been found, as well as the results of a DNA analysis. They wanted to be sure that it was truly Darwin. On November 23rd, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, the Peruvian National Police once again came under intense public pressure. Possibly for that reason, Interior Minister Juan José Santibáñez ordered that Darwin's body should receive no honors. He was eventually buried in a private cemetery. After that, both police stations that Sheila's family had contacted were inspected by Peru's public prosecutor's office. The heads of the police stations were ordered to provide certified copies of the personnel files of all officers who had been on duty on the days when the Condor family tried to file a missing person report for Sheila. On November 24th, the same minister, Santibáñez, appeared on a Sunday television program. He admitted that his colleagues had misjudged the situation and announced that Peru's Ministry of the Interior, together with the Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations, would conduct a special information and training campaign for police officers. According to him, the main goal of the campaign was to improve the response to cases involving disappearances and physical violence against women. At the end of November, Sheila's mother, Elsa, issued a sharp statement expressing her deep outrage over the complete silence of representatives of the Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations. She said that since her daughter's death, she had not received a single phone call or a single word of support. Forced to deal with her severe emotional condition alone, she sought psychological help herself. Elsa also insisted that her younger daughter, who was only 14 years old, also needed psychological support. At the beginning of December, the launch of a comprehensive investigation was officially announced against the police officers who had refused to accept the report, as well as against those who had violated protocol when Darwin's body was discovered. Meanwhile, the lawyer for the Condor family, Aaron Alaman, said they were considering filing a complaint before the Human Rights Commission. He explained that the main goal was to hold not only individual officers responsible, but the state as a whole. He also criticized the actions of the police. According to him, the luminol examination in the apartment where Sheila was killed was carried out only 3 days after the body was discovered, which could have seriously affected the integrity of the evidence. Meanwhile, a mass demonstration demanding justice took place in the city. People protested not only against Sheila's murder, but also against the actions of law enforcement authorities, who, in their view, had obstructed the investigation. On social media, dozens of women's organizations expressed their distrust of the police. By that point, the case had already caused such a strong public reaction that rumors began circulating online about a possible link between Darwin and an organ trafficking network, and that Sheila might have been one of the victims of that criminal network. On December 6th, the prosecutor's office released the official results of the autopsy on Sheila's body, which had been performed at Lima's Central Morgue. Among other things, the report stated that all of the young woman's organs were present. This disproved the rumors about organ trafficking. However, it was not possible to determine the exact cause of death, which triggered a new wave of questions. The Condor family learned about the autopsy results from the news, not directly. The next day, the family's lawyer issued a new public statement pointing to serious police violations related to the handling of evidence. In particular, Alaman emphasized that access to the security camera recordings from the residential complex where the murder took place had been restricted. According to him, he had personally gone to the location to make copies for analysis, but the prosecutor had ordered that the materials not be handed over either to the family or to their legal representatives. In addition, the prosecutor had not set a date for the official review of the recordings. The lawyer suspected that these materials could contain important evidence, not only clarifying the timeline of events, but also identifying possible accomplices. On January 25, 2025, Aaron Alaman issued another statement. This time, he said that a video had been handed over to the prosecutor's office that could completely change the course of the investigation. According to that footage, Darwin entered a police building only a few days before Sheila's body was discovered. The video shows him entering a police station on the very day Elsa Condor tried to report her daughter missing. This meant that the officers who refused to accept the report not only knew who Darwin was, but also deliberately concealed his presence. It was also established that those same officers had tried to destroy recordings in which the young man appeared. According to Alaman, Darwin should have been arrested immediately on the exact day Elsa first went to the police, but that did not happen. Now, those police officers could be charged with aiding a crime. The lawyer for the Condor family added that, based on the new evidence, he had every reason to believe that Darwin's death was a murder by those who were the first to report his whereabouts. At present, there are 3 main lines of investigation in this case: the murder of Sheila, the breach of duty by police officers, and the alleged attempt to make Darwin's death appear voluntary, which is increasingly being viewed as a possible murder. The police officers who found his body are currently being prosecuted. They are accused of violating service regulations, hiding evidence, showing inaction, and abusing their authority. Although none of those officers is currently charged with murder, an international arrest alert has been issued to prevent them from fleeing the country. In addition, the authorities have launched a project to modernize the police structure, which provides for the immediate dismissal of all officers involved in criminal acts. If such a reform had been carried out earlier, Darwin would already have been removed from service after the incident in 2023. In other words, Shyla might still be alive. Thank you for watching, and take care. In 2016, Evelyn Sayos Yi Wong disappeared. Her daughter told the story of an escape to Singapore, but the truth was literally hidden beneath the ground. In the septic tank of the family home, a secret had been buried, and it took 4 years for it to be uncovered. From fake posts on social media to suspicious cement purchases, this case became an example of a horrifying deception. Yet, as with every other lie, the truth eventually came to light and exposed a crime that shook the whole country. This is the case of Evelyn Sayos Yi Wong from the Philippines. Imagine that your mother suddenly disappeared, but continued to post actively on social media. At first, that might seem harmless, but over time it would become suspicious. That was exactly how the Sayos family felt when Evelyn Sayos Yi Wong, a devoted mother, vanished from real life but still appeared on her account. Even stranger was the fact that her daughter, Joanna Sayos Yi Wong, apparently showed no concern about her mother's absence. In 2016, an unusual story began inside the Sayos family. Joanna told her siblings that their mother had suddenly traveled to Singapore. According to her, Evelyn had left the house in an emotional state in order to distance herself and process their constant conflicts. Joanna claimed that her mother continued to stay in contact with her by sending birthday greetings and warm messages through social media. The last time the 54-year-old Evelyn Sayos was seen was on August 20th, 2016. After that, she disappeared. This sudden disappearance left the family in a state of shock and confusion. Over time, doubts began to grow. The family noticed that Evelyn's messages were short and contained no details about her life. She never initiated video calls and never sent recent photos. When she was asked about her life in Singapore, she answered vaguely. Something about the situation did not make sense. How could a woman who had no serious problems with her family suddenly disappear and cut off every direct form of contact? The warning signs became louder. Passport could not be found, and there was no record that she had left the country. The more the family examined the situation, the more inconsistencies they found in Joanna's story. As weeks turned into months, it became harder and harder to ignore Evelyn's absence. Only on September 7, 2018, 2 years later, did Evelyn's son, John Levi Sayos Yi Wong, finally decide to report her missing. At first, the police were not especially alarmed because they assumed Evelyn might have left of her own will. No urgent action was taken, and the case remained on the list of lower priority cases. In June 2020, however, during renovation work at his mother's house, John Levy noticed a strange, unpleasant smell. At first, he ignored it, but over time the stench became stronger. He asked the workers to dig beneath the kitchen floor, and then he came across something horrifying. Evelyn's identification documents, passport, and bank card were hidden beneath a layer of concrete. John Levy's heart tightened with fear. The realization that his mother's belongings were buried under the floor caused deep concern. He began to doubt whether his mother had truly gone to Singapore, and he was afraid to investigate further. The next day, desperate, John Levy turned to the police. Officers came to the house, skeptical at first, but prepared to investigate. The digging lasted for several hours until the officers reached the unfinished septic tank. As soon as it was opened, a foul smell filled the air. Inside was a lifeless body, decomposed beyond recognition. The officers immediately sealed off the area and called medical personnel to recover the remains. The discovery shocked John Levy and the authorities. How had Evelyn's body ended up there? Who was behind this terrible act? The search for answers had only just begun, and it became clear that someone in that house had been hiding a horrific secret. After Evelyn's body was discovered, police sent it for an autopsy at the Regional Forensic Laboratory. The results were grim. Evelyn had died from a fatal stab wound to the neck. The autopsies confirmed that the cause of death was homicide. Her body showed multiple stab wounds. The injuries were brutal, and her skull had been struck with a blunt object. There were 5 stab wounds in the chest area, 2 in the neck, and 2 incised wounds on the right forearm. It was obvious that the killer had held deep hatred toward Evelyn. John Levy's worst fears had been confirmed, but he needed further proof. To establish certainty, a DNA test was performed, confirming that the body did indeed belong to Ma, Evelyn Sayos Wee Wong. The shocking truth was now clear. The woman believed to be living in Singapore had been dead the entire time, buried right beneath their feet. Suspicion quickly focused on 2 people who had claimed Evelyn was abroad: Joanna and her boyfriend, Ronald James Rudy. Police arrested the couple without hesitation on suspicion of murder. On July 23, 2020, Joanna and Ronald were taken into custody. During questioning, officers asked them about Evelyn's disappearance because both had been staying in the house throughout that period. Under the pressure of the situation, they showed signs of nervousness. Silence filled the interrogation room when Joanna finally broke down and confessed the shocking truth. She had killed her own mother, and Ronald had helped her. The motive behind this terrible act was said to be a long list of grievances and conflicts. It turned that Ronald had developed intense hatred toward Evelyn, fueled by constant arguments between Evelyn and Joanna, especially over Joanna's lifestyle and her relationship with him. According to the arrested couple, Evelyn's constant criticism and scolding had created a toxic atmosphere that eventually led to violence. In reality, Evelyn was a loving mother from Dasmariñas, deeply devoted to her children, especially her son and daughter, whom she valued above everything. Her parenting style combined warmth and discipline, as is common among many Asian mothers. She always wanted the best for her children. As Joanna grew older, Evelyn began to worry that her daughter was behaving recklessly. At 16, Joanna became pregnant and moved in with her boyfriend, the father of the child. Evelyn was devastated when she saw how easily her daughter seemed to give up her future. According to Evelyn's son, she often scolded Joanna about her responsibilities as a mother and about how she cared for the child. Evelyn did not realize that her good intentions only deepened her daughter's resentment. Every time Evelyn scolded Joanna, Joanna ran to her boyfriend and told him everything she thought about her mother. Over time, the boyfriend also became angry with Evelyn. Perhaps he saw her as an obstacle, or perhaps he simply could no longer tolerate Joanna's complaints. That is how a dark plan formed, one that changed Evelyn's life forever. On the day Evelyn disappeared, Joanna called her mother from the stairs and told her she had a surprise for her. Evelyn, unaware of the danger waiting for her, calmly went downstairs. But Ronald was already there, waiting with a hammer in his hand, overcome by blind rage. Without hesitation, he struck Evelyn on the head. She fell to the floor with a pained groan. Blood covered the floor, but she was still breathing. In panic, realizing there was no turning back, Ronald ordered Joanna to get a kitchen knife. She obeyed and returned with a large knife. In a horrific act, they stabbed Evelyn repeatedly to make sure she would not survive. After the killing, they carried Evelyn's lifeless body to the septic tank beneath the house and threw it into the dirty water, believing they had buried their secret forever. Ronald ordered gravel, sand, and cement, then mixed the materials to seal Evelyn inside the septic tank. They believed this was a safe solution, but they were wrong. Days turned into weeks. Evelyn's body began to decompose in the dark tank, spreading an unbearable stench. Neighbors noticed the foul smell coming from the property. There were also reports that Ronald was frequently seen mixing fresh cement to seal the area. Whenever the smell became too strong, Ronald went outside, filled the cracks, and added even more cement in an attempt to hide the crime. Meanwhile, Joanna had another plan to divert suspicion from herself. She decided to impersonate her mother online, regularly updating Evelyn's page and corresponding with family members as if nothing had happened. She went to great lengths to maintain the deception, posting birthday greetings in Evelyn's name and replying to friends and relatives with casual messages. To everyone on social media, it seemed as though Evelyn was alive and well. This deception worked for a long time, and no one questioned Evelyn's absence until John Levy discovered the truth and the web of lies began to unravel. Ronald was charged with murder under Article 248. Joanna was charged under Article 246, connected to the killing of a direct family member. At present, there is limited publicly available information about the final judgment against Joanna Sayoswi Wong and Ronald James Rudy in the killing of Ma Evelyn Sayoswi Wong. According to the available reports, they were arrested, charged, and taken into custody. It is possible that the proceedings were not completed publicly or were not widely reported in the media. The case of Evelyn Sayos reveals a disturbing reality hidden beneath the surface of what seemed to be a normal family relationship. She was a loving mother who, despite the emotional pain caused by the reckless actions of her daughter, Joanna, and her boyfriend, opened both her heart and her home. Yet they repaid her kindness with a cold-blooded murder because they believed she complained too much. It remains to be hoped that justice will prevail. This next case took place in Bogota, Colombia. In the 1990s, a criminal case made headlines in local newspapers and national news broadcasts. It was revealed that the authorities had arrested a so-called witch. No, this story had nothing to do with supernatural or inexplicable events. However, It was connected to unresolved cases from previous years. The so-called witch turned out to be an ordinary fraudster who practiced what she called witchcraft and claimed to possess various abilities, such as healing the soul and body or multiplying money. In reality, spells, love charms, and other rituals served only to deceive people and take possession of their property. Maria Concepcion Ladino Gutierrez, better known as Doña Conchita or Sister Maria, was born in Bogotá, Colombia, in the 1960s. According to available information, she had been interested in black magic and occult practices since childhood. One morning, Maria, like many other people, was waiting for a truck carrying food. While standing in line, she got into an argument with another woman who, as it turned out, had an equally fiery temper. Eventually, the women attacked each other and began pushing. Suddenly, when Maria realized she was losing the confrontation, she stepped back and began waving her arms in an unusual way while saying strange words. Neither the words nor their meaning were understandable to those around her. Still, it looked frightening. Soon, news of the conflict and Maria's behavior spread through the neighborhood. In addition, a few days later, her rival was admitted to the hospital with severe bone pain. Some local residents, impressed by what had happened, connected the woman's hospitalization with Maria's strange behavior. Maria immediately received the nickname Witch. It must be said that she did not feel insulted by people's reactions. Instead, she used the situation to her advantage and began turning her new reputation into a source of power. People now believe that Maria's spells were truly effective, and many neighbors and residents of the area began asking her for help. Little was known about Maria's herself, mainly because she rarely spoke to others about her life. It is known only that she had no children, no husband, and no close family. She rented a room in a relatively large house by local standards, owned by an elderly couple, Eduardo and his wife, Nubia. Don Eduardo spent his free time sitting in front of the house solving crossword puzzles. His wife was usually near the neighboring school, selling papas chorreadas, a Colombian potato dish. Maria quickly gained the trust of the elderly couple. Seeing that many tasks were difficult for them, she offered to help. She mostly helped with shopping and household chores. She also promised to heal their illnesses with a special remedy she gave them, and with massages using herbal ointments. The retirees were very grateful for her help. In this way, she gradually won their confidence. This eventually led to the elderly couple simply disappearing one day. It cannot be said that many people immediately noticed their absence. Yes, a few neighbors noticed that Nubia was no longer selling her food in front of the school. When some of them asked Maria about the couple, she simply replied that they had become ill or had moved in with their children. It is worth mentioning that Maria's appearance had changed noticeably for the better. She looked more polished and better cared for than before. Several months after the elderly couple disappeared, their children, who lived in Ibagué, came to their parents' house. They had not heard from them for a long time and had begun to worry about their health. When they arrived, the house was locked because Maria was not there. Eventually, Eduardo and Nubia's children called the police, who broke the locks and entered the home. The house itself looked as it always had. A report was then filed to search for the missing retirees. During the investigation, police officers determined that money the elderly couple had kept at home had disappeared. It was a large sum, around 150 million Colombian pesos. Months passed before one of the bodies was found. It was discovered by children playing near the San Juan River. Don Eduardo's body lay under a pile of stones, covered with numerous injuries. Unfortunately, despite the investigation, it could not be established who had killed the elderly man so brutally. His wife Nubia was never found. Meanwhile, on August 15, 1994, Maria moved to Fontibon, a busy district in western Bogotá. Once again, she searched for a room to rent. Eventually, she arrived at the home of 54-year-old Carlos Julio Montaña, who lived with his wife and 3 young children. The man willingly rented Maria a room, and she immediately began using her tricks. She told Carlos that he looked very exhausted for his age and offered him her help. Maria spoke about her supposed remedies and claimed it was her gift to help people. Then she took a substance from her bag, which she said was a remedy from the other world. The man took the substance without much hope. The next day, Maria brought him desserts and tablets that, according to her, would help remove everything bad from his body. After several weeks, Carlos began trusting his new acquaintance more and more. He even felt better after she gave him tablets and potions. Because of that, he did practically everything the so-called witch told him to do. He took herbal baths, supposedly meant to drive away evil spirits, and participated in other ritual procedures. In general, everything seemed normal, and family members began to believe that Maria truly possessed the gift of healing. In October of that same year, however, something happened that changed everything. Carlos's wife came home after another day of work. When she entered the house, she noticed that her husband had not touched the food she had left for him before leaving. Then she went to the bedroom and saw that her husband was asleep. Maria also entered the room. She told Carlos's wife not to wake him because he was in a spiritual trance. And after that, Maria gathered Carlos's wife and children downstairs to hold a spiritual session that was supposedly meant to help the man in his trance. During the session, Carlos's wife felt a chill run through her body. She became nervous and decided to go upstairs to see her husband. When she entered the bedroom again, she tried to wake him, but soon noticed that he was lying in a pool of his own blood. At first, she thought her husband had suffered a heart attack, but then she saw a deep wound on his neck. The woman immediately called an ambulance and the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at the scene. They questioned the women, but neither said anything useful. Apparently, the widow did not tell the police the truth because she feared the supposed supernatural abilities of her tenant. Eventually, it was established that Carlos had first been poisoned and then had his throat cut. After this incident, the woman received handwritten letters that were supposedly written by her husband and sent from the afterlife. These letters said that the family should trust Mike's Maria because only she could help Carlos find peace in the next world. They also stated that the family should hand over all their property to Maria. This time, however, the widow was less gullible and threatened to report Maria to the police. The next day, the so-called witch disappeared. This time, she moved to San Cristobal, where she rented another room. Shortly after moving, she met a man named Nabardo Adalberto Guevara Torres, who owned 2 taxis. Adalberto told Maria about his problems, more precisely, that he could not earn enough money because he believed he was cursed. Maria confirmed the man's words. She also offered to help him drive away evil spirits in exchange for a reward of 1,500,000 pesos. The woman then subjected Adalberto to several herbal baths. After several weeks, the businessman realized that the cleansing treatments had not helped him and that his financial situation had only worsened. In desperation, he decided to sell the cars and placed an advertisement. Maria found out about it very quickly. She told Adalberto that she had a son who would gladly buy the cars from him and asked him to remove the advertisement. As a result, they made a sales agreement for the cars, and Maria paid him with a check. After that, she convinced the man to undergo one more cleansing procedure that, according to her, would protect him from anything bad that might happen. After that, Adalberto was never seen alive again. When his family members went to the bank to cash the check, they were told that the check belonged to a stolen checkbook and therefore could not be cashed. After that, the family began looking for the fraudster, since everything pointed to a scam committed by her. A week later, they received the familiar letters from the afterlife and finally turned to the police. Maria was arrested and charged with fraud, but because of a lack of evidence, she was eventually released. After her release, she returned the car and moved again. This time she settled in the city of Bucaramanga, where she became known as Sister Maria. In August 1996, she resumed her activities. Her next victim was an older woman named Heidi Ferrero, who worked in the jewelry business. Maria used her usual method and convinced her victim that a blessing ritual was necessary for the success of her business. The ritual took place directly inside Heidi's shop. Maria began speaking in a non-existent language and gave the woman a glass containing a green liquid, which she was told to drink. It did not take long before Heidi fell to the floor. Maria then searched all the rooms and took the jewelry. Before leaving, she took the victim's car keys and placed the body in the car. She then drove several kilometers until she reached an isolated location. There, Maria poured gasoline over the car and set it on fire. Heidi's body was found the next day, and Sister Maria had already disappeared again by then. Maria returned to Bogota. There she befriended a woman who kept 3 million pesos hidden away. She manipulated her new acquaintance and gave her the famous potion. This time, it only drugged the victim for several hours. While the woman slept, Maria stole the money and left, believing the woman was dead. In 1997, Maria settled in the Ciudad Jardín area in northern Bogota, where she again managed to take a large sum of money from an elderly couple and then kill them. That year, the so-called witch managed to deceive more than 20 people. Some of her victims disappeared, while others, fearing death, chose not to go to the police. In early April 1997, the Bello Clavijo sisters turned to Maria for help. Their mother was suffering from cancer that had been diagnosed at an advanced stage. The grieving young women believed that Maria could help save their mother. The so-called witch agreed. She came to their home several times to perform her false rituals. She also learned that the sick mother had saved 13 million pesos, which were supposed to pass to her daughters after her death. The woman died 1 month later, but Maria claimed she had done everything she could to save her. She helped the grieving sisters cope with the loss of their mother. A week later, When they received their inheritance, Maria convinced them that the money had to be blessed. According to her, they could also multiply the inheritance if they performed a special ritual that would supposedly double the amount within 4 months. In mid-July 1997, Maria met with the women to perform the first phase of the ritual. She asked them to bring the inherited money and place it inside a chest, which then had to be put under the bed. Once this was done, the so-called witch began calling upon spirits that were supposed to cleanse the chest of bad energy. After that, everyone present held hands. Maria acted as a medium so that the sisters could communicate with their deceased mother through her. In the following months, the women received the now familiar letters, supposedly written by their mother, in which she asked her daughters to trust Maria completely because the so-called witch would now protect them. After some time, the sisters attended another spiritual session to communicate with their mother, but one of them began to suspect that something was wrong. She went into the room where the chest was kept. When she opened it, she was shocked to find only 4 banknotes inside. When the other 2 sisters found out, an argument broke out. Maria, however, tried to calm everyone down. She said the money was still there, but had simply become invisible to ordinary human eyes. The so-called witch assured the sisters that they would receive twice as much as they had placed in the chest if they trusted her. As a final step, the sisters had to go through a cleansing ritual. The ritual had to take place near water. That is why Maria took her victims to a stream. There, she asked them to drink a potion. The unsuspecting women did as they were told, and, one after another, soon fell unconscious to the ground. Then Maria took several large stones and threw them at the heads of her victims. After that, she covered the bodies and left the scene. 5 days after the incident, the victims' relatives reported disappearance of the 3 sisters to the police. During the investigation, the authorities came across Maria. After several days, they found her address, but when officers entered the room she had rented, she had already disappeared. In this way, the so-called witch became the main suspect in the disappearance of the 3 sisters. Experienced investigators concluded that this was not the woman's first crime and began looking into similar cases from the past. This led them to an unresolved case from 1994 that also involved witchcraft and healing practices. Later, but several other cases were discovered in which a certain witch was also mentioned. Investigators began searching for a woman in her 40s who was allegedly involved in witchcraft and who moved around the country looking for vulnerable victims. Despite the authorities' efforts, finding this woman was not easy because she constantly moved from one address to another. In August 1998, near a stream outside Bogotá, the bodies of the women were found. The bodies were in a terrible state of decomposition. A few hours later, the victims were identified as the missing Bello Clavijo sisters. After the autopsy, traces of benzodiazepines were found. Similar traces had also appeared in other unresolved cases registered years earlier. While investigating the scene, one of the investigators noticed a surveillance camera positioned near the access point to the stream. He requested the footage from the day the women disappeared, allowing the authorities to identify the license plate of the car Maria had been using. Later reports state that Maria Concepcion Ladino Gutierrez was captured by the Colombian Attorney General's office in January 1999 after an extended search. During questioning, Maria behaved strangely. She laughed and cursed. It is possible that she was trying to pretend to be insane. Investigators quickly realized that they were dealing with a cunning manipulator who was not willing to cooperate with the authorities. Eventually, Maria was sent to El Buen Pastor Women's Prison in Bogotá and underwent psychiatric examination to determine whether she was legally responsible for her actions. Further, after several evaluations, it was established that the so-called witch had been fully aware of her actions. The only condition identified was
in dessen Folge
antisocial
Maria
personality
Concepción
disorder.
Ladino zu
Maria
39 Jahren
Concepción
und 11
Ladino
Monaten
Gutierrez
Freiheitsentzug
was later
verurteilt wurde.
convicted and sentenced
Im Jahr
to 40 years
2009
in
wurde
prison.
sie aus dem Gefängnis entlassen
Later
und unter
reporting
Hausarrest
also
gestellt.
stated that she was placed under house arrest. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself. Sometimes a criminal manages to erase his tracks so well that he becomes a difficult puzzle for investigators. To understand today's story, investigators had to work extremely hard. Even so, justice took a long time. A student campus can hardly be described as a completely safe place, especially because of frequent parties. In some cases, however, it becomes a place where real crime can grow unnoticed. On April 30th, 1999, 21-year-old Jamie Glenda Hart worked her regular shift, delivering pizza around College Station and the surrounding area. Her workday ended shortly after midnight on May 1st. A worker named Adam invited her to watch a movie, and Jamie agreed. They spent time together, and at around 4:30 in the morning, the young woman drove back toward her residence. On the morning of May 1st, neighbors on campus noticed that Jamie's car was not in front of the house and became worried. One of the residents called her boyfriend, Chuck Cruz, who was on his way to work. He admitted that he did not know where Jamie was because they had not seen or spoken to each other since April 29th. The reason was an argument after they had decided to take a break in their relationship. Chuck advised them to contact the police if they did not receive any news about the young woman soon. The neighbors called the police, but the officers did not take the report with much urgency. An adult woman had disappeared, but she might have been staying with friends. She might have drunk too much, or she might simply return later. Because of that, the neighbors were advised to call her friends and search for the young woman themselves. But soon, the situation took a tragic turn. Early the next morning, a frightened woman called the police and reported that the body of a young woman had been found by the roadside near Bryan. The victim had several severe head injuries. She had been beaten and undressed. Everything indicated that she had been thrown from a moving car and injured during the fall. A short time later, a patrol officer found scattered clothing about 1 kilometer from the crime scene, including torn pieces with stains that looked like blood. The young woman had probably been attacked with the intention of sexually assaulting her. However, it remained unclear whether this was a deliberate murder or whether the young woman had died while trying to jump from the moving car. While the police were checking missing persons reports, they made the following discovery. At 5 o'clock that same day, the police found Jamie Hart's car about 10 kilometers from the place where the body had been discovered. The car looked as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. The headlights were still on, the key was still in the ignition, and the engine was idling, slowly using up the remaining fuel. Around the car, investigators found traces that looked like blood. Inside the vehicle was Jamie's driver's license, which allowed the previously found body to be identified. The car was found only 3 blocks from her residence. It remained unclear what had prevented the young woman from getting home safely. The police came to the camps where Jamie lived and began questioning people. Investigators gathered their first information about the deceased young woman. Her neighbors described her as a very positive and friendly person who could not possibly have had enemies. Then the investigators visited the workplace of her boyfriend, Chuck. He said that he had not seen the young woman for several days and had not been able to reach her that morning because he thought she was simply sleeping. Jamie's father had already been informed about the tragedy and invited Chuck, whom he considered almost like his own son, to Baytown so they could prepare the funeral together and support each other during that difficult time. Meanwhile, detectives continued their investigation in the area where the car had been found. Investigators questioned local residents in an attempt to find witnesses to the attack. Police interviewed hundreds of people in College Station. Some of those questioned said they heard screams in the early morning hours of May 1st, although they had not seen anything. Hoping to speed up the investigation, the local newspaper published a notice offering a reward for any information that could help solve the crime. The examination of the victim's car produced no clues pointing to the suspected attacker. All the blood found belonged to Jamie herself. The autopsy results showed that the young woman's body had injuries typical of a fall onto a gravel surface. The examination also confirmed sexual assault. A fractured skull, a broken neck, and severe bleeding in the brain caused the victim's death. According to the expert report, death occurred between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the morning, and the final minutes of Jamie's life were filled with suffering. It took several weeks before investigators received the DNA profile of the man who had assaulted the young woman. The profile was compared with the existing database, but in 1999, the database was not yet extensive enough, and no match was found. Investigators began questioning Jamie's close friends and acquaintances in order to reconstruct the final hours of her life. It turned out that on Friday, April 30th, Jamie had delivered pizza around the city and had visited several addresses, which made the search for suspects significantly more difficult. The police created a list of the homes she had visited and began checking every possible contact, including collecting DNA samples. Investigators also continued examining the victim's life circumstances in order to narrow the circle of suspects. Jamie Glenda Hart was born on November 14, 1977, in St. Louis, Missouri, in the United States. Soon afterward, her family moved to Baytown, Texas. The city was experiencing a boom in the oil industry, and Jamie's parents hoped to build a better life there. During that time, Jamie studied diligently. The young woman dreamed of leaving Baytown and enrolled at Texas A&M University, a respected university known for strong academic programs. In order to study more comfortably, she had to move to the Bryan and College Station area, where the university campus was located. There she lived in the quiet atmosphere of student housing, and it was there that Jamie became even closer to her father, who supported her financially and often visited her. During her second year of studies, Jamie met a young man named Chuck Cruz, who was 3 years older than she was. Chuck already had a steady job and seemed like a serious and responsible person. Their relationship quickly developed into a serious romance, and people around them noticed how happy the couple seemed. It appeared as if they might soon marry and build their future together. After Jamie's younger sister enrolled in school, the family's financial situation became worse because her father was trying to support both daughters. Jamie realized that she needed cheaper accommodation and found a room in student housing a few minutes from the university. There, she shared the apartment with other young women and young men, which helped reduce her expenses. But even that measure could not fully solve the financial problems. In the spring of 1999, Jamie had to temporarily interrupt her studies. To earn money so she could continue her education, she took a full-time job at a pizzeria and worked as a delivery driver. Jamie dreamed of becoming a biomedical engineer and continued to believe that she could return to her studies once she had saved enough money. Sadly, her life was suddenly ended, and she never had the chance to fulfill all her plans. Investigators learned that after her shift, Jamie had gone to her friend Adam's place to watch a movie with him. It seemed strange that Jamie, who was in a relationship, had spent time with another young man. Suspicion arose that Adam might not have been only a friend. Perhaps he was Jamie's new romantic interest, someone she had started seeing after her argument with Chuck. During questioning, Adam seemed genuinely devastated by what had happened, but he raised suspicion when he refused to provide a DNA sample. He said that Jamie had stayed with him from about 1 o'clock in the morning until 4:30. They had talked, watched a movie, and then she had driven home. His refusal to cooperate with the police increased suspicion against him. Investigators considered the possibility that the new relationship had not gone as planned, that Jamie had rejected him, and that Adam had become angry and killed her. For that reason, investigators decided to watch him. After the interview, one of the detectives secretly followed the young man when he entered a bar. Adam drank a beer and left. The police officer waited until the young man was out of sight and then took the used glass in order to collect his DNA. At Jamie's funeral, police officers met her boyfriend, Chuck, and invited him for questioning. The young man said that he had spent the night of May 1st at home playing computer games, which was a normal activity for him. However, his statement could not be confirmed because his roommates were asleep at the time and could not testify in his favor. Chuck hesitated at first, but eventually agreed to provide saliva and hair samples for DNA analysis. He also took a polygraph test, but failed when answering the most important questions. The young man was visibly nervous and asked to repeat the test, but he failed again. In tears, he admitted that he had made some mistakes, without explaining exactly what he meant. These admissions strengthened the investigators' belief that Chuck might have been involved in Jamie's murder, and he became a suspect. The investigators gathered all the collected information. Chuck's computer was seized, and an examination showed that he had not been playing computer games that night as he had claimed. According to him, he and Jamie had stopped communicating 2 days before the tragedy. He explained this by saying that they had argued. At the same time, the young woman had spent the night with another man and disappeared afterward. One of the victim's friends reported that shortly before the argument, Jamie had been thinking about breaking up with Chuck, although he had not wanted the relationship to end. A love triangle seemed to be forming, one that had ended fatally for Jamie, so every man had to be carefully checked. During another interview, Chuck appeared tense and nervous and avoided direct eye contact. He confirmed that he and Jamie had argued 2 days earlier over a small matter in a store. When he was again questioned about his strange behavior during the previous interview, he insisted that he had not been thinking about murder, but only about minor offenses, without explaining what those offenses were. After the interview, Chuck drove to his parents in Dallas and hired a lawyer. The police continued calling him in for questioning. They searched his car and apartment and seized his laptop. All of this happened while investigators waited for the DNA analysis results, which they expected would point to someone from Jamie's closest circle. The main suspect remained Chuck, who seemed like an abandoned boyfriend carrying resentment toward the young woman. However, the DNA results were surprising. The samples did not match anyone who had been in contact with Jamie that day, including Adam, Chuck, and the customers to whom she had delivered pizza. Everyone except Chuck was removed from the suspect list. He remained on it because of his strange behavior and failed polygraph tests. Investigators continued putting pressure on the young man, mainly because of his suspicious statements. Chuck himself insisted on his innocence and urged the police to investigate the case thoroughly and find the real killer before he found another victim. A few days later, a student contacted the police and claimed that he had seen a man leaving Jamie's car near the residence. The witness described the suspect in detail: a dark-skinned man in his 20s, of medium build. A composite sketch based on his information was published in local newspapers to draw public attention to the case. The description did not match any of the current suspects. In the meantime, police officers checked possible links between this crime and other crimes that had been committed in Texas during the 1990s. The wanted notice was sent to all Texas police agencies that handled serious crimes. Jamie's friends and relatives offered a reward for any information that could help solve the case. Despite all efforts, 6 months after the murder, the police still had no major leads, which led to many rumors among the residents of College Station and Bryan. Even a year later, in the year 2000, the investigation had not moved forward, and Chuck continued to be suspected of involvement in the crime. 1 year after the murder, a new shock struck the campus area. It happened only a few minutes from the place connected to Jamie's case. At around 4:40 in the morning, on May 28, 2000, a resident of the complex alerted emergency services after seeing smoke rising from the windows of an upstairs apartment. At first, firefighters thought it was an ordinary incident and assumed that students had accidentally set trash on fire. But when they forced open the door, they smelled the sharp odor of a burning human body. In the bedroom, the body of a young woman lay on the floor. She was nude below the waist. She was dead. It was obvious that she had been brought there after the attack, possibly after she was already dead. The attacker had gathered everything that could burn around her hips: papers, books, notebooks, and clothing, and had set it on fire. That area appeared to be the source of the blaze. The fire department determined that the windows screen had been cut. The attacker had climbed through the window after cutting the screen and had reached the door handle from inside. The killer's tracks had been wiped away with the victim's towels. In the kitchen, investigators found the young woman's overturned purse, from which the attacker had apparently stolen valuables. Nevertheless, one important item remained inside: her driver's license. Thanks to it, the victim was identified as 21-year-old Carolyn Casey, originally from Lawton, Oklahoma. After finishing school, she had moved to Texas, studied, and worked as a kindergarten teacher. Carolyn lived nearby, like Jamie. She was sociable and friendly, had no enemies, and that made her death completely incomprehensible. It seemed that no one had a motive to kill her. Carolyn's parents were immediately informed about the tragedy and came to the crime scene without delay. Meanwhile, investigators intensely questioned the neighbors in the hope that someone had seen a suspicious person. One of them reported that between 1:30 and 2:00 in the morning, while half asleep, he had heard muffled sounds coming from the apartment. The sounds had not alarmed him, however, and he had calmly gone back to sleep. The medical examiner determined that Carolyn had died by strangulation. She had probably also been sexually assaulted. Unfortunately, the attacker's DNA traces were damaged by the fire. Still, Carolyn had managed to fight back. Skin particles from the attacker remained under her fingernails. Experts confirmed that Carolyn had died before the fire started because her lungs contained no traces of smoke. The two cases were similar. Investigators believed that the same offender was behind both crimes. 20-year-old Kristen Lancaster was deeply shaken by Jamie's death, and now, 1 year later, Carolyn's murder caused great fear in her. Her feelings were completely justified because she herself had been the victim of an attack 3 years earlier. On that fateful day, Kristen decided to relax and went to a friend's party. There, she met a dark-skinned man named Enob Matthews, who behaved in a friendly and relaxed way throughout the evening and gave the impression of being a pleasant person to talk to. Later that evening, when Kristen's friend had an argument with her boyfriend, her new acquaintance suggested going upstairs to his room to avoid the conflict. As soon as they entered the room, the man's behavior changed suddenly. He shoved Kristen roughly into the room, locked the door, turned the music up loud, and ordered her to undress. Kristen's attempts to stop him, and even her lie that she was HIV positive, had no effect. When she realized that the situation was getting out of control, the young woman began knocking loudly and screaming, hoping to attract the attention of her friend downstairs. The attacker sexually assaulted Kristen's and tried to strangle her. Fortunately, her friend downstairs heard the screams and called the police. Patrol officers arrived quickly at the scene and caught the attacker while he was beating Kristen. The man nearly killed the young woman while trying to silence her. He pressed so hard on her neck that Kristen felt as if it had broken. The attacker was arrested and taken to the police station, but the next morning he was simply released. The reason was that Enob Matthews gave police his own version of events. According to him, he had offered the young woman illegal substances, but she had no money and suggested paying with sex. He claimed they became intimate, after which he gave her crushed aspirin. When Kristen realized she had been deceived, he claimed she attacked him. Enob said he had tried to push the young woman away, causing her to fall several times and suffer abrasions. According to his version, all of Kristen's injuries were either the result of self-defense or accidents. He claimed the accusations of violence were the young woman's attempt to get revenge for being tricked. He was believed. When Kristen saw the next crime scene, she wondered whether the attack against her 3 years earlier was connected to the latest murder in the city. As police officers questioned Carolyn's neighbors, they noticed a young man named Inobi Matthews. He claimed that he had known Carolyn only casually as a neighbor and had shown no special interest in her. Inob voluntarily provided a DNA sample and even brought the clothing he claimed he had worn on May 28, 2000, the day Carolyn was murdered. His behavior seemed completely normal. Police became interested in him after one of the victim's friends described him as suspicious. It also turned out that Inobi was the attacker who had assaulted Kristen. The description of the attacker given by a witness in Jamie's case matched Inob's appearance, and he became the new main suspect. Inobi confirmed that he had indeed been at the party with the second victim, Carolyn, and that she had driven him to a nearby store where he bought alcohol. He further stated that Carolyn had left the event earlier, around midnight, together with a friend, and that he had not seen her afterward. When police checked the store's surveillance recordings, they discovered that Inobi had been dressed completely differently from what he had previously claimed, and that he had submitted different clothing for examination. This clearly indicated a lie and an attempt to hide information, which seemed suspicious. At the same time, his appearance in the video footage fully matched the description given by the witness who had seen the man leaving Jamie's car. During the subsequent search of Inobi's apartment, police officers found the exact clothing from the surveillance video among the dirty laundry, and bloodstains were discovered on it. When an investigator confronted him with this information, Inobi admitted that he had had an intimate encounter with Carolyn, but claimed it had been consensual. The police still did not have enough evidence to arrest him, so they decided to examine Inobi's possible involvement in other crimes. Inob Catron Matthews was born on April 14, 1976, into a poor family. His childhood and youth were full of difficulties. At the age of 17, he married. The couple had one child. Later, 3 more children followed, but Inob showed little interest in them. During that time, he had a poorly paid job, sometimes dealt illegal substances, and survived through occasional work. In 1999, the young man lived near Kristen and rented an apartment with a friend. Later, that friend remembered that shortly after Jamie's murder, Inob suddenly moved out without explanation and went to live with an acquaintance in another apartment complex, where he was also not officially registered, making him harder to find. In earlier years, Inobi had already been accused in several cases involving animal cruelty. Despite his confession, he was released early on probation. In 1995, he forced his girlfriend into sexual acts and was convicted but avoided a prison sentence. Inobi had a gift for lying convincingly, which helped him avoid serious consequences. For later similar incidents, he received comparatively mild punishments and was eventually released early. 24-year-old Inob Matthews had a criminal past, had been involved in several violent crimes, and was considered a suitable suspect in the murders. It also became clear that he had assaulted Kristen. While examining the circumstances of the cases, investigators found similarities between the cases of Jamie, Kristen, and Carolyn. Finally, police officers invited Inobi in for questioning. Although investigators still did not have the DNA analysis results, one detective decided to use a small trick. 10 minutes after the interrogation began, his colleague sent him a message in large letters saying that the DNA matched without giving details about whose DNA it was or which case it referred to. Inobe saw the message and suddenly changed his behavior. At first, the suspect had categorically denied guilt, but after reading the message, he became confused and immediately admitted involvement. This confession was enough to arrest Inobe for the first-degree murder of Carolyn, even though the actual DNA analysis results had not yet arrived. Inobe described the incident with Carolyn and presented it as an accidental killing. Once again, he portrayed himself as the victim and claimed that the young woman had attacked him first. When questioned about Jamie, he initially denied guilt. Eventually, however, he admitted that on May 1, 1999, he had forced his way into Jamie's car, sexually assaulted her, and tried to abduct her. In an attempt to save herself, Jamie jumped from the moving car and suffered fatal injuries. When Adam and Chuck were finally cleared of all suspicion, they felt relieved. Chuck repeatedly emphasized his innocence and expressed his fear that the real killer had been free and could strike again. He criticized the police for focusing on him instead of searching for the real perpetrator, and he believed that this had contributed to Carolyn's death. In June of 2001, the trial in Carolyn's case took place. Several young women who had survived attacks by Inobe testified there. They reported that his preferred method was to choke his victims until they were almost unconscious, then wait until they recovered so he could begin the torment again. He used similar methods on animals and appeared to take pleasure in it. Based on all the evidence presented, the prosecution's version seemed convincing. The jury found him guilty of murdering Carolyn and sentenced him to death. For Jamie's murder, he later received a life prison sentence. In 2001, Inobe was imprisoned while awaiting the execution of his sentence. On average, offenders can spend more than 10 years behind bars before execution because of numerous appeals aimed at reducing or overturning the sentence. Inobe, however, did not continue fighting the sentence for long, so the death penalty was carried out relatively quickly. On January 6, 2004, he was executed by lethal injection. He declined to give a final statement, but mouthed words of love toward his family members who were watching. Many believed that such a calm and peaceful end did not match the suffering of his victims. It seemed as though his crimes were far more numerous than what had been proven. And in fact, that was the case. Long before the cases of Jamie, Kristen, and Carolyn, Inobe had another victim, Misty Johnson. She learned about her connection to this case only after the trial. The young woman was lucky to have survived because, during the assault, she did not resist in order to avoid his death threats. Like Kristen, Misty reported the attack to the police. But her story was also doubted, and Inobe claimed that everything had been consensual. Afraid of his revenge, Misty refused to keep fighting for justice. She quit her job and moved to another city. Now, like Kristen, she regretted that decision because she realized that she might possibly have saved other young women from death if she had not stepped back at the time and if the attacker had been sent to prison earlier. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.